Woody Guthrie was a giant of Western American folk music, looming large in the American imagination. But the man who helped pioneer resistance music was also unfairly blacklisted and had anything but an easy life. Here's the tragic story of Woody Guthrie. Named after the soon-to-be President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson Guthrie was born July 14, 1912, in the small town of Okemah, Oklahoma. His father, Charles Guthrie, was a successful businessman, local politician, and KKK member. Basically, everything Woody would grow up to fight against. Although slavery was formally outlawed, Jim Crow laws, white supremacy, and an epidemic of racist violence were spreading across the country. This was during a time when the KKK had nearly total control over the state of Oklahoma. The year before Woody's birth, Charlie attended and possibly participated in the horrific lynching of Laura Nelson and her son L.D. Nelson. 10 years later, the Tulsa Race Massacre was carried out by mobs of white men, roughly 60 miles from Guthrie's birthplace. Though he came from money, family misfortunes would leave young Woody Guthrie struggling along with other poor, displaced, and black Americans.
Don't you get just a little bit embarrassed about having so much when so many people got nothing?
As a result, he quickly latched onto the egalitarian ideas of socialism. That his father embodied many other things he'd come to stand against affected Woody, his work, and ideology profoundly. While Woody's early years were spent in relative comfort with his successful businessman father, things changed quickly for the Guthries. After World War I, bad real estate deals led to Charlie losing his land, with his mother Nora institutionalized for displaying erratic and occasionally violent behavior. Charlie left for Pampa, Texas, with his two younger children, Mary Jo and George, leaving Woody and his older brother Roy to fend for themselves in Okemah. The need to survive made 14-year-old Woody Guthrie extremely resourceful. In addition to playing music on the street for change, he picked through the trash to find scrap to sell and stayed with friends or traveled for whatever other work he could find. During his junior year of high school, although he was popular for his humor and music, Woody dropped out to join his father in Pampa. While living in Pampa, Woody learned to play the fiddle, banjo, guitar, and violin so he could play at dances for money. But he also worked for a bootlegger, painted signs, and did whatever else he needed to. Despite earning very little money for all his work, Woody Guthrie was known for giving it away to anyone he thought needed it more than him. This was noble, but it would also cause problems when it came to keeping his young family fed in the coming years. Woody Guthrie met his first wife, Mary Jennings, in Pampa, and they married in 1933 when he was just 19. By then, the great drought that caused the Dust Bowl was already devastating the plains. By 1934, the once fertile region had been turned into a desert wasteland, deepening the impact of the Great Depression. With a new family to provide for, Woody migrated to California during the Dust Bowl. At the time, novelty cowboy singers were wildly popular. In 1937, Woody found work performing a comedic musical hillbilly act for radio on KFVD in Hollywood. Along with his broadcast partner, Maxine "Lefty" Lou Chrisman, he was able to ride the wave of cowboy nostalgia and make a name for himself in Los Angeles. The duo received thousands of fan letters and a little money. But as Guthrie's audience grew, so did general awareness of his socialist views. The songs Guthrie was singing on the radio expressed a notably left-wing political ideology. Amid fears that the radio station would appear sympathetic to the Soviet Union, Guthrie was fired. The more politically vocal he became, the more his following shrank. However, Woody Guthrie continued to develop and share his voice and ideas. In New York, Woody Guthrie was supported by a like-minded community of radicals and musicians like Pete Seeger, Leadbelly, Burl Ives, and many others. His popularity climbed again, and in 1941, he formed an anti-war folk group called the Almanac Singers. By this time, Mary and the children were living back in California, and the Guthries were all but divorced. Woody, however, stayed furiously busy. At first, the Almanac Singers wrote songs critical of the war, but when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, their music became explicitly anti-fascist. This was the era where the famous phrase, quote, "This machine kills fascists," began appearing on Woody's guitar. Before the divorce with Mary was finalized, Woody Guthrie was already starting a family with Marjorie Mazia. He joined up with the military-adjacent civilian naval group, the Merchant Marine, after being persuaded by a friend, did his time, and returned home, but soon received another draft notice. His pleas for deferment were denied, and he was sent out again. But Guthrie's communist leanings became less and less tolerable to the United States government, so in retaliation for some of his writing in communist newspapers, the FBI suspended Guthrie's Seamen's papers. He was then drafted into the Army just as World War II was coming to an end. But as it turned out, this would not be the end of his harassment by the government. Whatever the public thought about his politics, many in the government considered the prolific writer of folk songs, children's music, and ballads for the working class to be a potential threat to the United States. As early as 1941, the FBI was keeping files on Woody Guthrie. The files were filled with things like traffic citations, missed car payments, and even work he had done for the Department of the Interior as so-called evidence of Woody's activity with the Communist Party. This surveillance continued even as his health was declining due to Huntington's disease. In 1953, the FBI interviewed his physicians, demanding doctors break patient confidentiality so the government could monitor his health status and classify him as a security risk. Guthrie was publicly declared a communist by the House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, in 1948, then publicly smeared and blacklisted. The tragic irony is that, while he certainly shared the same views, Woody Guthrie was never actually a registered member of the Communist Party. And while the label hasn't stopped Guthrie from staying on in the popular imagination, it's hard not to wonder what his legacy could have been if he hadn't been hounded by a paranoid government for so long. As the Red Scare reached a boiling point, Hollywood stopped making movies that could potentially be seen as controversial or socially aware during McCarthyism. Woody Guthrie lost film projects he had lined up, and his loosely autobiographical book, Bound for Glory, was shelved.
I identified with Bound for Glory book more than I even did with On the Road.
The same sad phenomenon occurred within the music industry as RCA Victor discontinued his Dust Bowl ballads in a major blow. Soon, the singer who wrote song after song praising the power of unions couldn't even find work. In the wake of the anti-communist frenzy, union members were forced to sign anti-communist oaths as a condition of membership, so they were scared of retribution. In some ways, this experience made Woody Guthrie into a martyr. While newspaper headlines continued to echo the paranoid and dangerous accusations by HUAC, Guthrie wrote, "These un-American committee boys are causing more folks to love us communists than to hate us." However false this bravado might have been, there is no denying that the Guthries were struggling financially after Woody was given the McCarthy treatment, which worsened tensions with his wife Marjorie. Guthrie's friend, actor, and fellow blacklisted leftist Will Geer bought property in Topanga Canyon where he lived off the land with his family and built a theater that became a refuge for other starving artists. Woody moved into a shack on the property following a split with Marjorie. After the HUAC hearings, Woody Guthrie struggled to find work, left Marjorie working almost non-stop to support the family. By the late 1940s, Guthrie was already suffering the effects of the same disease that had violently taken his mother. Huntington's disease destroys brain cells, leading to mood disorders, psychotic breaks, dementia, and death, usually within 15 to 20 years of the diagnosis. As Guthrie began to show the erratic, unpredictable, and occasionally violent behavior caused by Huntington's, Marjorie became afraid for their children. After repeated violent outbursts and brief hospital stays, doctors suggested to Marjorie that Woody go to California for the safety of the children, and with few options available to him, he did. Shortly after he went to Topanga Canyon, the Guthries divorced. While living on the Geer property in Topanga Canyon, Woody's health continued to worsen. But as prolific and expressive as he was, he kept playing music and performing whenever he could. It was in this cloistered artistic community that he met Annika Van Kirk, a married hippie who lived nearby. Though she was half his age, the two began an affair and eventually married in 1953. Woody's ongoing struggles meant he couldn't provide financial security, and the couple had to rely on friends in the area for many of their needs. This only exacerbated tensions in the community that had started with Annika and Woody's affair. Many of their friends didn't approve of the situation, resenting the fact that Woody had run off with the wife of someone who was generally well regarded in the community. On top of that, Annika was exhausting herself trying to take care of Woody as his health continued its steep decline. Woody was only 42 when he entered the hospital for the last time in 1954. He would remain hospitalized with some brief breaks and transfers between hospitals until his death in 1967. The slow process of death brought on by Huntington's would be truly miserable for anyone. As it advances, the disease causes people to lose mobility, memory, and even the ability to speak and move. For Guthrie, the extremely prolific writer and singer who devoted his life to communicating with others through music and activism, this was a fate worse than death.
Woody has been in a hospital now for 10 years. Probably won't write another song.
The disease wasn't very well understood, and Woody Guthrie went essentially untreated. Eventually, he could only communicate by moving his eyes. He died at the age of 55 on October 3, 1967.